Welcome to Enabling Buying in a World of Selling. This is a podcast with leaders, thought leaders in my world, and what enabling buying in a world of selling means in their world. If you're curious about the idea behind all of this, check out my book, Enabling Buying in a World of Selling, at enablingbuying.com, where you're actually able to listen to some chapters and pre-order the book today. Let's get into it. So we're just catching up, Paul, and Paul Kirch. Let me introduce you to our audience. Paul Kirch and I go back, what would you say, 3-4 years?
Probably 3.5 years. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And I was introduced to Paul through something he runs called the Boss Academy, which you can speak about in a while. And during our travels, I think it was organic, like all the best things, where we just decided to work together. And Paul is working from time to time under the Criteria for Success umbrella and the Collavia umbrella. So CFS for short, because it's a mouthful, is the sales consulting side of our business, and Collavia is the platform side of our business. And the purpose of today is really to explore, not really come up with any hard and fast answers or rules, or I always say the answer is the booby prize, because the questions, if it's a good question, will keep us engaged and thinking. Whereas once we have the answer, we're done. Like, yeah, there we go. We've found the answer. So the question is, what is enabling buying in a world of selling? And I put that out there because it's very much a concept that came out of my head and is still in my head. And I've written a book about it, which will get published in the fall of 2025. And Paul's been kind enough to join because Paul's actually delivering on the methodology. And I'd really like you, Paul, to talk about that. But before you do that, tell us a little bit about you and how we met and, why we work together from your standpoint.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So I believe we met because I don't know how we originally were connected, but I remember asking you to consider coming to speak and present at Boss Academy and consider membership. Boss Academy started in 2014. It was a radio show back then, a drive time show in Dallas, and then later turned into a podcast, which, the mission behind Boss Academy, Boss always stood for business ownership success strategies. And that was the intent behind the show. And we had a lot of success with it. I ended up on a top 10 business list in 2017. So, Boss Academy became kind of this passion project that grew out of my sales consulting agency that I started in 2009. And I really felt like that I had the opportunity to serve and give back and help others. And that's what the show started off as. In 2017, I was going through a divorce, so I shut the show down and focused on my kids. But when it came back to life in 2021 as an online community, I knew that a lot of the work I'd done in the sales coaching and consulting space could really help our members. And so I started connecting with people like yourself. And it's really interesting. I know we're going to talk about enabling buying in a world of selling. And I think that instantly doesn't necessarily always paint a clear picture to a lot of people. But you and I are aligned in a lot of ways. And I think one of the really interesting things is I think all buying decisions take place at an emotional level. And a lot of people out there are talking from a, factual features and benefits, and they rely wholly on that, and they don't connect with the real needs of buyers. And so that's one thing that when I met you, I was like, oh, okay, I like this guy. We understand each other. We're kind of on the same page, but you really got it. And it's really interesting because I think that a lot of times we meet somebody and they say we want to work together and nothing ever comes of it. A lot of the times those conversations disappear. I think it was almost 2 years before you and I really got the opportunity to work together. And that just goes to show that I think a lot of times we don't maintain relationships. We don't do the follow-up. We don't stay in touch. And that's a missed opportunity. So I know we're going to talk about a lot of things today, but thank you for having me on and letting me be a part of this because I love your mission. like I said, I think you and I are very much aligned, and there's a lot of things we can do to help people out there.
Beautiful. So I know when you're working with us, and I've seen you in action outside of working with us, you're really good at training, mentoring, and coaching, and I've seen you do it. And there's a real it's hard to find someone who can coach somebody with both empathy and accountability.
Yeah.
It's always a fine line to balance. So I'm going to ask you, like, when you're training, and we can lump in coaching in that word, why does it need to be real world and not theoretical? And what's the difference? And why does it matter?
Yeah, I want to step back and you brought up a really interesting point. You mentioned training and coaching, and I think a lot of times people think those things are synonymous. You know, it's like, oh, I'm going to train somebody and then do a coaching session, which is more training. And they're really two different things that work together and complement each other. And so that's one thing that's really I love about the CFS model and even the Collavia tool that we use is the idea that training and coaching complement each other to help people find a better path. But um, your question was, I'm sorry, I apologize. What was the question again?
So why should it be real world versus
Oh yeah,
theoretical? I
real
can
world.
give you lots of theoretical ideas, but we don't tend to do that.
Well, I did improv comedy for 3 years, and I was on a team. And during that time, there was improv is built around this philosophy of yes and I have always loved role playing when it comes to sales coaching and working with teams because it puts the closest to a real world situation without it being a real world situation. And sometimes you can really put people in a place where they're going to learn and test themselves. And I think that if we only teach textbook, we teach from a program without really putting people in real situations, then when they are in a real situation, it's not natural for them. And sales is a situation where often we feel like we have to convince somebody to buy our products. When in reality, if we learn through a process of real conversations, real examples, when we get in those situations, we understand that it becomes more about the conversation. It becomes about connecting. It comes down to how do we really earn their trust. That's why I love asking questions and then learning to listen. I mean, years ago, I'll tell a quick story here. So years ago, I had an opportunity, a fairly large company in LA that I wanted to get their business, and they had a multi-million-dollar project. I was in the market research space at the time, and I knew that if I could find out who was running the project for them, that I had a chance of taking some of that business away. And so I came up with a plan, and my manager was going to join me on this trip. And I said, "Listen, here's what I want to do. I want to ask her these questions and see if I can find out some information." He says, "Great." So I had that piece of it down. Got to the meeting. Everything went kind of as planned. In fact, everything was kind of set up almost perfectly. And I got the opportunity to ask the questions just like I planned. And afterwards, I'm pretty excited. I get out in the parking lot. I'm talking to my manager. I said, "Yeah, it was good meeting." And he goes, "Yeah, Paul." He goes, "What happened when you asked her about that project and where it was being done?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "That's the one thing." I said, "Everything was almost perfect. I asked the questions, and then she really never answered it." And he looked at me and he goes, "Oh no, she answered it. You were just too busy worried about the next thing you were going to say that you didn't even hear what she said." And it's like in that moment, Charles, I realized, I was my own worst enemy. I didn't prepare to listen. Active listening is such an important skill, but that really kind of changed my perspective on how I apply training and coaching because I know that if I can set somebody up in a situation where they can be prepared to address these things that are really going to happen, potentially going to happen, then it becomes natural and easy for them versus a challenge. It's a long answer to your short question.
No, it's actually a very open question. I was looking for that answer. It was something like that. Um, I was making notes while you were speaking, and I wrote down role playing. And at least in my experience, and maybe in yours also, when you mention that to people we're working with, the eyes roll. It's like, oh no, not another role play, especially if I'm doing it in front of my peers, etc. So, removing all that baggage for a minute, when you're role playing, are you, how much of your role play is focused on the enabling buying versus word of selling part? And do you want me to distinguish the two, or do you feel you got enough to answer the question?
No, I mean, I think my personal perspective is that sales has gotten a bad rap. There's a lot of people that have given sales a tainted image over the years, high pressure sales, always be closing. Yeah, we need to learn to close, but that form of selling today is very alienating. Um, I think that everything we do should be focused on enabling buying. And I mentioned connecting with an emotional level. What does that mean? Well, it means that I'm probably talking to somebody who's, if, depending on their leadership role, if they're an owner, they might be having some sleepless nights. They might be wondering, how am I going to keep the doors open? How am I going to make payroll? We don't know what kind of pressure they're under. And not every emotion is negative, right? So if we give them an opportunity to be able to relieve some of their stress because we're bringing them some additional resources, bringing on some additional sales. Now all of a sudden, it's like that emotion is not the negative, it's the positive, but they're dealing with a lot of emotional struggles. So when we're selling and all we're talking about is the stuff that's easy to talk about, it's like, oh, we've got this feature, that the switch, this lever, this nice little add-on, but it doesn't address their needs, then we wonder why we're not closing the business. So I think everything we do should be focused on enabling that buying.
Just want to press on this one point, then I'll move on to another question because you just triggered something for me, and that is, you know, and I know you're gonna chuckle because we've been down this path with a bunch of clients together. This has been an adventure you and I have been doing for a long time
Hmm.
together, and that is, when we tell our clients, and I guess our clients, the people that pay us, the leaders, the CEO, the head of sales, the C-suite, um, here's our program. There's training, there's coaching, there's mentoring. Almost always, the client's like, "What's this coaching piece?" And we give them an answer, and they're okay. But that question never seems to go away. It's almost like it's haunting us, and I'll explain in a second. So to set it up, my experience is you're a good coach. You have a person that you're coaching, and there's this agreement that what's being said is personal and private. But there's also a piece that you've got to tell people, well, we're actually going to report your activity, and we're going to get asked, oh, are we seeing progress? Do we think that, there's something that we can continue to work on, et cetera, or recommendations where you could get some additional training that we can't provide. So that part is not confidential. But yes, because you and I and Elizabeth, who's our third coach, make this agreement that, we want you to be open. We want you to tell us what's going on. Talk about what it's like to have that engagement with a company where you're coaching a bunch of salespeople on a sales team, and the person who's holding us accountable, who's usually issuing the checks, keeps asking, "What's this coaching, and how do I know it's working? And tell me what's going on. Why should we continue this coaching?" Tell us a little bit about that. And do you think it's an issue? Is it something you are concerned about? Do you think clients are concerned about? Do you think others listening now might want to know, like, how do we solve that?
Yeah, I mean, listen, when it comes to training, it's pretty clear cut what you're doing. You're teaching somebody a strategy, a philosophy, you're giving them tools. When you're coaching, it's meant to be more about uncovering what are their challenges or needs, what are the things they're facing, and then providing them either the ability to come up with those answers on their own or helping them find those answers. So it is a little bit more subjective, and it is hard for people to comprehend. But I will tell you that every successful leader out there, every business person, every athlete that's ever flourished has been coached. And often a coach is really meant to be that person who helps them support and find answers within themselves. Now, the nice thing about what we do through Criteria for Success is we train on topics, and then our coaching can support that. Okay, so what did you take away from that? Are you applying this? What's working? What's not? What conversations you're having? What hurdles are you facing? And I do understand why companies don't necessarily instantly go, oh yeah, I get coaching. But without coaching, I do think training is often a failure, because you can teach somebody a million topics. You can give them every answer in the world. How much are they going to really retain? How much are they really going to apply? A lot of times people walk out of training and they walked away with some great points, but they get in a real situation and now all of a sudden they forget to apply those things. They haven't practiced it. Coaching can reinforce that, and coaching can help them really tap into what they should be doing and what they're not doing. And I often feel like when we're training, new topics are great, teaching them something they've never heard before. But where do they get the biggest impact? Often it's the things that they know they should be doing that they're not doing. And that's sometimes where the biggest aha moments go. I've been in coach training situations where somebody says something to me that's maybe obvious, but I'm not doing it. And all of a sudden I'm like, oh my gosh, I haven't been applying that. It's like I'm not doing my daily planning. I'm not doing my goal setting. I'm not getting my stuff done at night the way that I should. And you start to make those shifts, but it's easy to fall out of those habits, whereas coaching can reinforce those things. So I think they have to go together to really get the best benefit out of training.
Beautiful. What are the habits the hardest to break?
I think that the hardest habit for people to break is every company out there has things that they develop or that they sell that are easy to talk about. They get excited about them. They're having board meetings. They're having meetings around the table. It's like, oh, we love this feature. Oh, this is so cool. And salespeople get out in the marketplace and they start talking about the features and benefits because it's easy to talk about. And they forget that every engagement has to tap into what are the needs of the buyers. And it's such a missed opportunity. I think the biggest failure of most salespeople is they're so busy talking about the things that are easy to talk about, and they're not listening. They're not asking the right questions.
So, in terms of that being a habit, what's the habit? The hardest habit to break is to listen more or talk less,
I
or
think the hardest habit to break is that falling back on the easy things to talk about, doing the hard
easy thing.
things.
Got it.
You know, I'm a big proponent of asking questions. In fact, outside of Criteria for Success, I have a program that's called Askology Method, and it centers around 4 question types. And one of the first things I have people do when I'm taking them through that exercise is come up with a list of questions. And a list of questions is great, but it's like I don't expect somebody to take a list of questions and ask it in settings. But now let's practice that. Let's not necessarily do I want somebody to get comfortable asking a list of regurgitated questions that they've created. But if you start getting in the habit of asking questions, one thing that's I think benefited me throughout my career is I may not be the most charismatic salesperson. I may not have all the the slickness that some people do, but I'm curious. I love to get to know people. I love to get to know what makes people tick. I ask questions because it helps me get to know someone, but it also gets them talking. So I think if you talk about habits that are hard to break, it's that falling back on the familiar, talking about the things that are easy to talk about. But where the biggest opportunity lies is getting comfortable with the idea that you want to get the other person talking, you want to get them engaged. And if you get them engaged, they find you more interesting. That's the interesting thing about it. The more you're talking, the more you alienate them. I remember years ago, somebody said, "Oh, you like to talk, you'd be good in sales." And I thought that. I got into sales. Guess what I learned pretty quickly, Charles? The more I talked, the more that I bored people, the
Yeah.
more that they lost interest in me because I was pitching them, I was forcing them instead of getting to know them.
Well, time goes by so fast when we're talking about this stuff. But I want to ask you one more question as we wrap up.
Yeah, of course.
And that is, how how do you keep the method alive so after we've been engaged, the buyer, the client, feels they got their ROI? In other words, our engagement's over, they paid us. How do they continue to leverage the good work? What do you think about, how that happens? How do we do that?
Well, we've all seen it. We've all been in this situation as we're coaching or working with teams where there's always going to be somebody who walks away going, "Well, I don't really understand what that person got out of it. We didn't see any increase in their numbers." But I will tell you that I think for most companies to really understand the process and benefit from it is they have to learn how do we take and apply that within our own organization and create a culture around learning and growth. And I think that's where we have an opportunity with CFS is to not just help them during the engagement, but teach them how to lead their team further. I think that organizations that operate in a vacuum and never share information with their employees, they create a place where people feel like they're not a part of something bigger. And I think from a cultural standpoint, that every company that really embraces this idea, let's bring our people into the conversation. They don't have to be a part of every decision, but let's let them know what's going on. Let's share the excitement. Let's get them involved. I had a guy years ago that worked for me that when I first joined this organization, I was leading the sales team, and they said, "Well, this guy, he's been here for a while, and he's got a lot of sales experience, but he's just not really cutting it. We think we're going to have to let him go, but we want you to make that decision." And I had just moved to Texas about a year earlier, and I'd never heard this phrase. Now I've heard it a million times since, but I'm having a conversation with him. He goes, Paul, this isn't my first rodeo." And so I'm like, "Well, I'm in Texas." But as I was talking to him, Charles, I first looked at how he was being compensated, and his comp plan was way different than everyone else's. He was undercompensated, and I thought, well, maybe he's just underpaid, undermotivated. But as I'm talking to him, I realized that what made him excited was to feel like he was a part of something. He felt like an outsider, and a lot of salespeople feel like outsiders, and they're treated like outsiders.
Mm.
They're not brought into the conversations. Operations sees them as the enemy because it's like, well, you're overpromising and we have to deliver it. And so for him, it wasn't about what he got paid. I did adjust his compensation. I wasn't seeing any different results. But one day I'm talking to him and he said something about, I just wish people here would listen to me. So I all of a sudden started taking things that he would share with me, and I'd talk about it with leadership, but I wouldn't take credit for it. I'd say, "Listen, John brought this up, and I think it's a great idea." We started having quarterly sales summits and training the team, and I would bring him in and say, "Why don't you do a presentation on this experience you had with this client?" Now all of a sudden, he felt like he was part of something bigger. Here's a guy who's probably a week away from losing his job, and he went from out the door to my number one salesperson. And when we sold the company and the company acquired us, he was number two globally for a very large organization. And it's all because he started feeling like he was a part of something bigger. And can you imagine if every organization treated their people like, "Hey, you know what? You're not just a salesperson. You're somebody that's really a part of this team, and let's get you involved in here's what we're working on. Here's what we're working towards. Here's the bigger picture. Here's why we're doing this." That is such a missed opportunity. So I think from my perspective, how do we help clients move forward? Teach them how to manage their team and create a culture of success.
Beautiful. I have to cut us off because unfortunately I have to jump at another meeting, but this is really helpful, Paul. I love your perspective.
Thanks, buddy.
You come across as very human. And I think that's one of
I'm
the
working
reasons.
on that.
Me too. I think it's one of the reasons you do so well as a coach because, you've been there, you walk in people's shoes, it's not theoretical. And I look forward to lots more coaching and training and working together moments.
Hey, it's my honor. I've become friends on top of everything else, and
Yeah,
I have such respect for you and Elizabeth. So I'm just glad to be part of this series. So thank you for including me.
you're very welcome. Have a great rest of your day.
All right, you too.
Thanks for listening to Enabling Buying in a World of Selling. Real talk with people who are really interested in this concept. Again, as a reminder, please go to enablingbuying.com where you can listen to some sample chapters from my book. And if you're interested, you can pre-order a copy for yourself. Looking forward to seeing you soon. And in the meantime, please enable good things.